Hello, everyone. My name is Kieran Duna, Chair of the branch. Thank you all very much for coming along today. Today we have a very exciting webinar for you. We have Sarah Morley and Jonathan Thwaites from the Water Hygiene Centre, and they're going to do a presentation for you on practical approaches to water safety with a focus on preventing Legionella. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Jonathan, and we'd welcome any questions at the end. So if you have any, please hang on. You can pop a question in the chat, or you can come on camera later at the end and ask your question. So thank you very much. We won't hold you up. Over to you, Jonathan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kieran. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your attendance today and during this lunch break. First things first, you'll notice that I'm not Pete Tyson. Pete was supposed to be doing this presentation today, but he got called away at the last minute, so I've stepped in his stead. I'm Jonathan Thwaites. I'm one of the senior consultants at the Water Hygiene Centre. We provide something called a role of an authorising engineer for water, and access to competent help, and various training sessions on the topic of water safety. So I've stepped in to cover Pete today. Sarah will be handling the questions. So as Kieran said, if you do have any questions, do pop them in the chat in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to respond to them. We'll do a Q&A session at the end of the session today. So without further ado, we will make a start on today's session. Practical approaches to water safety. The title of this course sort of came to light from our managing director. He was asked by a client to put together some more practical training on the topic of water safety. So he got his crayons out, put a course together, and looked at things from a sort of more hands-on approach to water safety. A lot of what we're going to go through today is based on our experience. As an organisation, we deal quite a lot with healthcare. So some of the images I'm going to show today are based on a healthcare environment, but they come from other places as well, local government, universities. Those that are healthcare, we can still learn from them. Just because their healthcare environment doesn't necessarily mean we can't learn from the issues that are going on in the wider field as well. So we'll make a start. I'm sure you have all over the years seen crazy photos like these regarding to health and safety. I've seen a number of them from time to time, and that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to take a practical approach, look at some images, talk through some things we have found with water systems, and especially the how not to do it. Learn from mistakes of the past so that we're not committed to repeating them again. Practicalities wise, we're going to cover a number of different elements through this session. Through the life of a water system, really. We'll start at the very beginning with design, installation, issues with project management, through to the ongoing management of water systems, through temperature monitoring, potential contamination, issues with sampling, and record keeping to make sure that we're demonstrating everything that we reasonably practically can do to manage our water systems is being undertaken. So let's start at the beginning and have a look at design and installation. And I think it's fair to say, and something I'll probably say a few times as we go through today's session, getting it right first time can make a real difference to organisations and to managing our water systems. Things to consider when we look at getting things right to start with is just considering how many organisations actually have a water safety group. And within that water safety group, do we have project representation on that water safety group? Do we have someone from the project team keeping the water safety group informed on new builds, refurbishment works that are coming through? We've seen issues in the past where specialist water equipment has been installed in the middle of a building. The image in front of you there looks a bit like the saucer section of the Starship Enterprise. It was a hospital where they're putting new services in, specialist services that required a particular type of water, but it was within the main body of the building. And this specialist service didn't have its own dedicated water supply, ended up being reliant on the water supply to the rest of the building. And then when it came to disinfecting the water systems in the building, they introduced the chemicals as they do, without realizing that the adverse effect this would have on water systems in this specialist area. So a bit of input at the beginning would have made a massive difference to understand the requirements of this particular water systems. The various technical guidances we've got make sure that we manage our water systems as well. So during the construction section of this particular project, it wasn't a massive project, but they were left with water systems that were stagnating. Technical guidance in HSG 274 Part 2 is very clear to make sure that during construction processes, water systems aren't allowed to stagnate. And you might want to consider flushing of the water systems that probably going to be more frequently than the weekly flushing we might do for low use outlets in other areas of the building. So daily flushing of the water systems was incorporated into this project. So that was a bonus. During the install phase, we can see issues with fixtures and fittings. They should be kept clean and free of debris. We've got a couple of images here. The one on the left shows some pipe work that's been left open. You would expect any pipe work being left open to be capped off so that contamination can't get in and contaminate the water systems. So open ends on pipe work is not a good idea. The picture on the right is, again, it's an install. It's still a construction area, and we've got a tap in the middle there that hasn't been suitably covered. So again, all sorts of contamination will collect on that tap during the construction process. This is some information on a hospital where new install was going in, and after being handed over, they found that the hot water system had not been successfully balanced properly. About 75% of all balancing valves had not been set up properly. Wasn't allowing the water to flow, and they're getting temperature problems, and the contractor actually had to come back in and put it right 2 years after the project was initially handed over. The ward in question was actually closed down for 2 months, all due to this poor configuration, the position of the return valves, and the balancing of the system. And then what didn't happen over time, or what happened over time, is you end up with biofilm forming inside the pipework. You can see here we've got some dirt and debris that was building up within the strainers on the system. Now, strainers will often build up a little bit of dirt and debris. That's sort of what they're installed for. But these were installed and nobody was aware of them, and then they weren't managed and maintained properly. So again, getting it right, making sure the right information's handed over when the project is handed over can make a massive difference for managing water safety. The competency of the people doing the install as well can make a massive difference. I'll probably talk about competency a few times as we go through this afternoon session. I see this a lot of times in new builds, labelling. You might better make out what we've got here, but make sure we're correctly labelling everything. On the left of the picture, we've got hot water supply flow, boosted cold water supply. On the right-hand side, the pipework changed to heating return. So something's not right there. Irrespective, it's probably obvious which one it is, but all it takes is for that wrong pipework labelling to be pushed back through the system, and someone's end up piping something into the wrong system. So incorrect pipework labelling can be something to look out for. Picture on the left there shows a local hot water heater that's been installed. And you'll probably notice there's a lot of extra pipe work that's on the flow from the hot water vessel. That's not an ideal situation. The reason for this install was, you might notice a block of wood above it. Originally there was a towel rail screwed into that block of wood, and they were using the heat from the hot water to help dry the towels. Well, that's not ideal. In fact, that's a contravention of the water fitting regs. Both photographs got issues with the water fitting regs, but you can't use domestic hot water for space heating. So that's not ideal. That's again the competency of the person doing the install. Yes, it's an ingenious way of providing some heat to dry some towels, but the implications are not good. Picture on the right. Again, we've got a contravention of the water fitting regs. We've got backflow contamination issues here. We've got a shower head that could be put in the hand basin, the potential for backflow contamination there. So whoever's installed that was not competent, wasn't understanding of what was needed. That needs to be a much shorter hose reel on the shower hose there. Photograph on the left of the screen there shows an install in a kitchen area in a hospital. Particular kitchen area was in an augmented care area in the hospital, so a high risk area within a hospital environment. And well, you may well have come across these in the past as well, flexible connections. Flexible connections are known to harbour bacteria, especially as they start to age. So in a healthcare environment, they shouldn't be installed in any patient areas. You might see them more out and about in sort of office buildings, things like that. But in this particular instance, we don't want flexible connections in a hospital environment. So again, that comes down to competency of the install team with regards to putting in flexible connections. Photograph on the right, again, it's another one from a hospital. This particular area, well, certainly to me, looks like a sort of utility area, clean utility area. Basically implies it's going to be a staff area. Now, one of the things that is important when it comes to water safety is considering scalding risk. When there is a significant risk of scalding, then we put some prevention in place. So if it were to be a patient area or anywhere that somebody might be at risk of scalding, we would install a thermostatic mixing valve, so a TMV. And that's exactly what we've got here. Under the sink, we've got a thermostatic mixing valve supplying the tap above it. For those of you that know a little bit about water fittings, you might have recognized that the tap installed on this hand basin is a thermostatic mixing tap. So we have two devices there providing the same thing. We've got redundancy. We don't need both. One would suffice. But I would even question whether we needed one in the first place. So has a scalding risk assessment been done during the process, during any refurbs or fit outs, or even just in general, to ascertain whether there is a scalding risk? And if it's a staff area, then the risk of scalding is not significant. So we don't need these TMVs. So not only have we got two where one would do, we probably don't even need one there either. And again, that comes down to competency. Also, I hate to say it, but a lot of designs I have seen over the years, design teams, architects, things like that, seem to be a little bit risk averse. So they'll stick TMVs in everywhere to provide a bit of protection. That's not how we should look at it. We should look at it from a risk management approach to make sure that scalding risk has been assessed and controlled where we need it to. Pressure vessels, hydraulic accumulators, those sort of items. We see them a lot in plant rooms. They're designed to buffer the pressure on a system, so they serve a purpose. But again, they can cause us some problems. One on the left there is a small little pressure vessel. It's on quite a long pipe run there. It's a flexible connection as well, which adds another element of issue to the question. But it's a stagnant section of your water systems, very likely to get little turnover through. In an ideal world, best practice flow through type pressure vessels would be the best option. But we don't always necessarily get to install these things. We're dealing with building stock that might be of some age where we've got these pressure vessels, again, because they can have some stagnant water in them. We need to keep an eye on them. So adjusting that install to make the pressure vessel as close to the pipework as possible would make a massive difference, just to minimize that dead leg, that dead end. The picture on the right shows a pressure vessel where the bladder has failed. Again, these things will have a service life. The manufacturers of these will probably recommend replacing the bladders on a particular frequency. If we don't do that, they're going to fail eventually. This particular one had been in place for a number of years, and you can see the amount of scale and sludge that has just built up over time. So again, there was a requirement to do some flushing of these vessels just to help purge any stagnant water and keep them as clean as we can. Sticking with the maintenance theme, and thermostatic mixing valves. Thermostatic mixing valves do require maintenance. They will require dismantling and cleaning and descaling at least annually, because they're mechanical items. The picture on the left shows one of these thermostatic mixing taps. We've got the various bits in the taps, and you can see we've got a couple of, well, the black picture on the right there, sort of strainers associated with these. They are mechanical devices. So these strainers help protect them. So they will pick up a bit of dirt and debris over a period of time. If you don't have the right maintenance regimes in place, we're not following guidance on what we need to do, then they can build up an area where contamination, bacteria can start to build up. So this comes down again to a bit of oversight on the water systems, but also down to the competency of the individuals doing the tasks, making sure they are cleaning these things properly. I suspect the image there, that particular TMV had not been serviced for a number of years, probably prior to being taken apart and those photographs being taken. And if we don't maintain them, they can then be the source of our contamination and our unwanted bacterial growth. See a lot of TMVs in healthcare, as you'd expect. So we mentioned sort of protecting patients from scalding risk is quite a key aspect, but they exist elsewhere as well, especially with some of these modern style sensor taps quite often have integrated TMVs with them as well. So being aware of them and looking at where we need to manage them can be quite key. So, as I've said a few times, getting it right at the design stage, getting it right first time, making sure it is installed correctly can help us reduce our risks and impact on our ongoing maintenance going forward. Removing things that pose a risk by design can make a massive difference to the ongoing control. So getting it right first time, I said it a few times, I'm going to say it a few more times today, is quite key. If you buy a car, you don't buy a car that needs the oil replacing every 3 days. You want a car that's designed to operate and work and not need massive amounts of maintenance. Making sure that the people building these things and designing these things have the competency and the understanding to manage it. Some of my colleagues and myself have heard all sorts of comments over the years. The one that's always stuck in my mind is our managing director was doing a presentation a couple of years ago, and one of the comments from one of the people on the presentation was, not enough people die of Legionnaire's disease every year to warrant doing anything with domestic hot water systems. And that just shows us a massive underappreciation of the implications of water safety. So making sure we have got oversight on managing our risks, making sure we have water safety groups in place, that we are reviewing our plans and our risk assessments, linking back to that scalding risk assessment. If you don't need TMVs, remove them. They are devices that do add risk to our water systems. So making sure that we're balancing our relative risks on managing our water safety can be a practical approach. Some of you may have come across this acronym, ALARP, as low as reasonably practicable. I spent a lot of my career undertaking risk assessments on water systems. And one of the things we try and do when we look at risk assessing water systems is essentially try and make our risks as low as we reasonably practicably can make them. And there are various guides out there with regards to assessing risks. There's British standards, there's the ACOP in L8 with regards to assessing risks. There's a huge number of British standards that I won't regurgitate to you today that look at the best practice for regards to managing water systems. And one of the things we need to look at is sort of what level of control we might need to put in place and what would be deemed to be reasonably practicable. And again, this looks back at your water safety plans, your project plans, and the level of management. The way we've looked at this is we've sort of separated out into 4 broad categories. I think I'd like to suggest that most of you would agree that outdated practice would not be acceptable at any level. Anything that might be deemed outdated, we wouldn't do. Conventional practice. So I'd normally describe conventional practice as following the guidance in HSG 274, the HSE's guidance on managing water systems. If we start looking at healthcare environments, we have the HTMs, so Health Technical Memorandums, specifically HTM 04, which talks about water safety for hospitals. And then even within a hospital environment, there are further levels we might need to go where we have these high risk areas. So usual interpretation of this is conventional practice, HSG 274, good practice, it's following the HTMs, and then the best practice we reserve to the real high risk areas, even within a hospital environment where we have, let's say, these augmented care areas. So understanding what susceptibility of the individuals we have we're going to be using our water systems can make a different level of what level of control and what level of risk we're looking to manage. I suspect most of you are more au fait with L8 and HSG 274, and if you do deal with healthcare, the HTMs go a few steps further to protect patient safety because they are more at risk of things like Legionnaire's disease. The safety comes in various forms. There is Legionella risk, is bacteria risk, but then there's also physical safety, things that are safe and unsafe. So a couple of examples here of some cold water storage tanks and, well, issues with safe access. The photograph on the left, I use this photograph in a number of my training courses. This photograph is taken from a particular building where, well, I would say access to that cold water tank would not be considered to be safe. It looks like it's a sort of just a loose ladder lent up against the tank to provide access to inspect and do routine maintenance. It might surprise you to know that is not a ladder. It's actually a cable tray that's just been left leaning up against the cold water storage tank. So not only is it a loose ladder, wouldn't be probably safe anyway, it isn't a ladder and definitely not safe to climb up. But that photograph has always made me chuckle a little bit. The photograph on the right is another cold water storage tank, perhaps safe for access from the person undertaking climbing up that ladder. It is guarded at the top, so we've got some safety implications there that have been well managed. But that tank's outside. When we talk about safety, is that tank shut off and enclosed so that malicious access couldn't be gained to that tank? Someone with a bit of a vendetta could climb up that tank, that ladder, lift up a lid, throw something in the tank, turn a valve off, change a setting. It's not just necessarily bacterial safety, it's actually physical safety of the water systems that we might need to consider as well. Photograph on the left there shows a point of use filter that's been installed. It's got a wonderful crack in it. So that would then question whether that filter would actually be effective. I suspect water would come out of the crack and bypass the filter to a certain degree. So when's that damage happened? Has the person installed it noticed the damage? Have they damaged it whilst they've installed it? Which then questions the competency of the person doing the task. Not that it's got damaged, things happen, but knowing that it's damaged and no longer going to work can make a massive difference. Picture on the right, at first glance, just looks like a normal hand basin, but we've got another point of use filter sat there on the side next to the hand basin. So that's been removed. Probably what's happened here is that a person using that hand basin has gone to turn a tap on when the filter was installed, found that not much water has actually come out of it, and pulled the filter off to get a better flow of water out the tap. It happens. These filters are very good filters. They'll filter out all sorts of stuff, including the bacteria that might be in the system, which is why we installed them. But you've removed the filter, you've removed that protection, and that filter's probably been installed for a reason. So again, taking a step back on competency and understanding, one of the jobs of the water safety group is to communicate to individuals what's going on and to communicate to staff that these filters might be getting installed from time to time. When they are installed, not to fiddle with them. They're there for the protection of the individuals using that particular hand basin. Potential contamination. Contamination can come from all sorts of places. Specifically, we've got a couple of examples here. We've got domestic cleaning cupboards, those sort of areas. You can see there we've got a little hand basin that's being used to store mops. Those mop heads probably going to have been used to clean a floor at some point. They're not going to be particularly clean themselves and could quite easily move some contamination up onto the tap as well. We get a bit of cross-contamination between the mop and the tap, especially when we start looking at things like Pseudomonas contamination. External contamination sources for Pseudomonas can be quite a key thing. So that's not ideal. Photograph on the right, again, a couple of things here. First of all, mop being used or being stored in a shower cubicle. That's not ideal. But actually, probably what that does mean is that shower's not getting used. Unless they're using the shower to fill up the buckets, which again is perhaps not an ideal situation. Although in this instance, this one's quite well connected, so it's not allowed to drop into the buckets, but there's still a potential cross-contamination. But to me, that questions usage. In fact, both of those would question usage. If someone's using a hand basin or a shower cubicle to store something in, they're not getting used. So they're going to stagnate. The water's just going to sit there not moving. Stagnant water is a great place for bacteria to grow, which is why flushing regimes are quite important. And again, it's that communication from the water safety group to flag up these things. We can flush things that we know about, but if we don't know something is not being used, it can sit there for a while. So these flushing regimes do need to be flexible and manageable, and people doing the task need to understand where they might need to add additional flushing regimes in place. Again, contamination. Talks about the shower heads. There's another one here where we've got a jet wash sort of hand spray thing, but again, water fitting regs, backflow prevention. We've got a sluice there where you've got potential sources, contaminations. That's a inappropriate installation. Photograph on the right shows an area that, with the best one in the world, is not being used. Another stagnant area, which needs flushing. Other sources of contamination. We've got another hand basin here that's got a point of use filter that's been installed. And in this instance, the point of use filter dropped below the spillover level for the hand basin. So again, we've got potential backflow contamination, backflow issues with the install of that filter. And another hand basin there that's been inappropriately used to store or just hold some medical devices. So again, lack of use, low use outlets. that can allow stagnation. We can contaminate our water systems. Personal hygiene, health issues can be a key aspect. The HDMs discuss health screening and understanding as part of training for competent persons out and about doing the work on our water systems, so they understand that they can be the person moving some contamination. So whether it's they've got an illness, they haven't washed their hands, or they're using equipment that is not kept clean, again, it's down to these competent persons doing the tasks to understand the implications. You will be doing some temperature monitoring, or someone might be doing some temperature monitoring on your behalf. So your water safety plan, your written scheme of control should have a methodology on how to take temperatures. What type of temperature probe are we using? Are we using immersion probes, contact probes, infrared probes? They all have their limitations and their pluses and their minuses. Again, having that procedure as part of your written scheme, your water safety plan, can make sure that things are being done properly and people have been trained to do things in the right way. Our temperature monitoring needs to cover some key things, making sure our competent persons doing these tasks understands what they need. So making sure your flow from your clarifiers is above 60, your return maintained above 50. In a healthcare environment, we'd aim for a 55-degree on the return, just up that temperature to a slightly higher level from a patient safety perspective. Making sure our hot water sentinel points above 50 or 55 in healthcare within a minute, and we keep on cold water stored and distributed below 20 degrees. I know we call this a practical training. There is a few videos on our website that don't necessarily work quite well, running them over Zoom and things like that. I'll talk about our website a little bit later on, but there's an academy page on our website that's got a few practical training videos on it that are freely available, one of which is on temperature monitoring. So if you wanted a little bit of additional advice on how to do some temperature reading, there's a little video. It's a 5-minute video you can watch just on how to do some temperature reading. Talk about sentinel points. Having schematics in place can help us identify our sentinel points in our water systems. This particular example's taken out of HSG 274. All I've done is used a fairly simple schematic drawing to identify the test points of the sentinel points on this particular hot water system. We've got a flow and a return from a clarifier. We've got some returns on some principal loops, some returns on some subordinate loops. Goodness me, get my teeth back in. Subordinate loops, and some cold water sentinels, the nearest one to the tank up on the top floor, and then a furthest one down there on the ground floor. So again, making sure this is all part of our written scheme of our water safety plan, that we've identified our sentinel points in our water systems. Return loops, principal and subordinate, are often hidden items in a water system. And there's been a requirement in HSG 274 since it was revised over 10 years ago to carry out temperature readings on these circulating loops in our hot water systems. And again, the number of people I still see that don't do it because they're not necessarily aware that they've got these loops on their hot water systems. So again, incorporating that into your written scheme, into your water safety plan from your risk assessments can make a massive difference. Understanding how to do some temperature monitoring. Again, a lot of people I talk to will use digital probes, an immersion probe or a contact probe to take temperature readings. Relatively straightforward. Slightly more modern technology here. We've got one of these infrared guns that you can use. Again, they work, but we just need to be aware of how they work and making sure our procedures are written down. Just for a quick example, this is the business end of the temperature probe. We've got a big circular bit. That's the bit that actually takes the reading. And then you might notice at the top there, we've got a small little circle. That's the bit that fires a little laser out of it. So when you try and take a temperature of a surface, you get a little laser point on the wall, and it takes a reading. But some things that some people don't always realize is it's not taking a reading where that laser hits the wall. So just to show you how that works, if you stick your finger on the laser, you don't get a massive difference in temperature. But stick it underneath, in front of that sensor bit, that's where you get the accurate reading. So again, just making sure that people doing these checks understand how to do it can be quite key. These infrared guns also, they don't like shiny surfaces. So bare copper, bare steel pipe can be very difficult to use one of these infrared guns to take a temperature reading. You need a matte surface, something that doesn't reflect light. So often just sticking a bit of masking tape on the pipe can make a difference in the temperature reading. Key thing with these, don't have them in your hand luggage when you go through security at an airport. A lot of questions get asked, which I unfortunately did do once. Wasn't because I was flying, it's because I was actually going airside to do some work on the water systems, but it was taken away and seriously looked at. But anyway, I digress. When you do temperature monitoring, things to avoid: not using the gauges on the chlorophyll and the flow and return pipe work for your sentinel monitoring. They are not hugely accurate. Goodness knows when they were last calibrated. So using these to record the temperature can be perhaps not the best idea. They're a good gauge, a good rough indication. So if the gauge on the flow is hovering around 60, it's a good indication that it's on and it's running at the right temperature, but not to be taking our accurate temperature readings. We need our calibrated probes, whether it's our digital probes or infrared guns, calibrated probes to actually take the temperature readings. Similarly, when it comes to BMS systems, there are all sorts of different types of building management systems out there that will take readings on our systems, some of which will give you just live data, so you have to make a note of it or take a screenshot or something. Others will record it ad infinitum, and so you've got a history of data you can look back through. So again, it's just making sure we understand what's being taken, what's being read, the limitations, and making sure we're using calibrated instruments. When it comes to water sampling, making sure we're doing it properly. There's various guides out there on to do water sampling. So we start talking about Legionella. BS 7592 is the British standard on how to do Legionella sampling. It's a good guide. You do have to pay for it though. There is a free guide, the Blue Book, from the Environment Agency. Again, could be a bit of a guide on how to do water sampling. But again, making sure this is detailed in our water safety plans on how and when we're going to be doing sampling. But then also how to deal with the results of the sampling as well. For those of you that deal with L8 and HSG274, probably fairly familiar with this little table. This is the recommended actions when you get Legionella results from your water systems. Any of you do deal with the HTMs and the healthcare, probably a bit more familiar with this one. I realise that's quite a lot of small writing on the screen. Your water safety plan should include sections on what to do when you get some unwanted results. The guidance in, going back a slide for a second, in HSG274, it's okay. It is a little bit dated. And I think, to be fair, even for those of you that aren't healthcare, I might be suggesting, and this is an opinion, but suggesting perhaps dealing with the guidance in the HTMs on how to deal with Legionella results is probably a bit better than using HSG274. It's my opinion, but I think it's a far better bit of guidance. If you're not healthcare, there's a couple of things you can skip over that are very much specific to healthcare, but it talks about the difference between pre and post flush samples, different levels, and how best to react. So I think it is a better guidance. If you're looking for something to incorporate into your water safety plans, that might not be a bad source to go to for what to do if you get Legionella in the system. A couple of things to look out for when doing Legionella sampling, making sure, again, competency is quite key, making sure people doing the samples are competent to do so. If you're going to do post-flush samples with disinfection, not using flames to flame the outlets. Some old guidance used to recommend that, but that just adds an extra element of risk involved. Other things to look out for: not doing Legionella and Pseudomonas samples at the same time from the same outlet. because you can only do one pre-flush sample. So you need to leave a bit of time in between to do the sampling. Making sure the samples get to your laboratories, making sure the laboratories we are using are UCAS accredited so that we can rely on the results. And yeah, multiplying volumes up, that's not good. Certainly when it comes to UCAS accreditation as well. We want to get, for Legionella, we want a litre of water being taken, not 100 mils and then calculations done to add it up and multiply it up. And again, we've got a short video on our website on how to do Legionella sampling for those of you who want a little bit of extra reading. Record keeping, making sure the records we keep are good. We've got 3 examples here of some record keeping. The one on the far left is an example from a client's premises. It's got some information. It's perhaps lacking a little bit of detail, but it sort of serves a purpose. And then the other 2 are examples that we've put together just to show you just a couple of things to look out for. Probably fair to say the one in the middle, whilst it ticks a box, it does some temperature monitoring. I would question mark the competency of the individual doing this. We've got some outer parameter results, yet everything is acceptable. So that is that's not the best option with regards to monitoring. The one on the far right is far more detailed. We've got some outer parameter results. We've got some notes. We've got some corrective actions. We've actually got some, I don't know, ticket numbers. Perhaps you've got again electronic system of tracking faults. We've got a reference there that from an audit perspective we can follow through. So clear, accurate record keeping, and not being afraid that things do go wrong. We get some dodgy results. A particular person's done a temperature reading at 12:30 and the hot water is a bit low. So he's gone back and checked it. An hour later, perhaps he knows that the kitchen draws off a lot of hot water at lunchtime. So that's where they get a little bit of a dip. But if he checks it during normal operation, it's back up to temperature. So some good, some bad, and some not so good on record keeping. I love it the fact someone's just written wrong on so many levels there. Yeah, okay, we'll skip over that joke. Just a couple of examples of where things have gone wrong. I will go through these fairly quickly just to sort of highlight a couple of key items in each one. This particular one is a little bit dated. This was an outbreak caused by Bulmer's cider factory. Both Bulmer's and the water treatment specialist Nalco that were involved were taken to court. There was a couple of deaths associated with the outbreak, and both the client and the contractor were fined £300,000 plus costs. It's about £50,000 each. And one of the standout items for this one was that the contractor, there was no evidence that the contractor had signed out the key to access the cooling tower compound. They were doing, or should have been doing, monthly checks, but there's no evidence that they'd actually signed out that key. I'll let you infer what you will to that one. But the point there is that there was no checks on the contractor to make sure that they were doing their jobs properly. So who should be actively checking these individuals? There's often a misconception that employing a third-party contractor to do something on your behalf absolves you of all your legal obligations. It really doesn't. You can obviously employ them to do certain tasks, but the responsibility of that system still remains with the party responsible for that particular system. This is Healthcare Trust. There was a death, again, a few years ago, a chap who died from, Legionella. It led to an investigation, and a lot of things were going on here. They had 114 positive Legionella samples, so Legionella detections within the water systems. They had over 600 non-compliant temperature readings. They were using chlorine dioxide as a supplementary control, and it wasn't dosing correctly on a number of their sites. And there was no evidence that these failures had been recorded or actioned upon. So they were fined £50,000. massive fine, but sufficient enough. Again, who's checking the works undertaken by the competent persons, the individuals tasked for doing these activities? That's where the non-compliant temperatures come in. They might have been recording it, but nobody was overseeing it. There's another death here. This is another hospital trust. There was a death in a care home. Sorry, it wasn't a hospital trust, it was a care home. Apologies. And it all went back to poor management. The task of doing a lot of the checks was basically given to the handyman on site, who had never received adequate training or supervision on how to manage it. There's also no system in place to cover this individual when they weren't at work. So people got from holiday, which is fine, but there was no cover there. So Legionella training was one of the big issues identified at this particular one, and then say £100,000 fine there. Training needs analyses. Training matrices are again one of the key aspects that the water safety group should be on top of, making sure that every individual involved with managing the water systems is competent and understands their roles and their responsibilities. Again, having that training needs analysis can make a massive difference. This one's a hospital trust. So it's Bath NHS Foundation Trust. Again, there was a death of an individual from a Legionella. This particular individual had been in the hospital going through cancer treatment, and unfortunately did die from a Legionella infection. They tested the hospital's water systems in the area this chap was staying. The strain of Legionella they found in the water system wasn't the same strain, so there's no absolute direct link that proved the hospital's water systems was the source of this chap's Legionnaire's disease. But the hospital was still fined because they weren't managing their water systems. They're putting patients at risk. Basically, what happened is this it was in a new area, new annex to the hospital, and they hadn't expanded their control regime to include this new area. So they hadn't reviewed their risk assessments, they hadn't looked at this new install, and they hadn't expanded their ongoing controls to make sure that this new area had been included. So again, one of the oversights of the water safety group, responsible persons, is to make sure that we have assessed risk, we have identified new projects, new areas that have come online, and that we're managing them effectively. Barrow and finesse. For any of you that done any Legionella-based training in the last 15 years or so, Barrow and finesse is the one case study that everyone tends to wield out. It's a really useful one, and it might be a bit of an age now, but the issues the HSC identified, which are the 6 key failings listed on the screen in front of you, are not unique to Barrow. These are the sort of things that crop up time and time again from the HSC. To do this full case study justice, I could probably talk for another half hour on it. I'll keep it short and succinct, and just identify the 6 key failures that are listed there. So they didn't have clearly defined management structures. They hadn't got a nominated responsible person. They didn't clearly define that, so it took the lawyers, the prosecution, to come in and make the decisions for them. They were given advice. The incumbent maintenance provider told various individuals, including this lady here, a lady called Gillian Beckingham, who was deemed to be the responsible person. It wasn't documented, but she was deemed to be the responsible person, and she was apparently told on a number of occasions about the issues. I also backed that up with a couple of emails in court, which were shown in court, which was quite good. And they failed to act on the advice and the concerns that were raised. They hadn't done a risk assessment. To be fair, that's be seen as a material breach anyway. You need risk assessments, and things like the management, health, safety and work regs and the cost regs, you need a risk assessment. So that's failure on its own. Poor management of the contractors and the contract documentation. It was all a bit woolly, a little bit open to interpretation, which led to some misunderstandings. Lack of training and resources. Competency. I've used that word a few times in this session. Competency is key. Making sure every individual that does anything on the water systems, with any management responsibilities, is suitably competent and trained and understands their responsibilities is quite key. And because of the lack of training, there were numerous individual failings. And like I say, those are the HSE's view on the things that went wrong at Barrow. I'd love to be able to spend a little bit more time talking about it, but for the moment, I think that will do quite nicely. Finally, last couple of items, just to show you some data. This one's just some data from, well, Public Health England, as they used to be. I'm aware they changed their name a few years ago now, the UK Health Security Agency. The data was published while they were still Public Health England. And this just shows the distribution and the onset of the illness, basically, by month. And as you can see, July, August, September time tends to be we get our peak in number of cases of Legionnaire's disease. Very much attributed to temperature. Warmer environments are much more conducive for things like Legionella to grow, but it's not solely there. We get them throughout the year. We get a fairly sort of consistent number even throughout the winter months. So it does happen. And the whole point of managing our water systems is try and minimize the potential for this to happen in the first place. Mention things like accreditation, competencies. Again, one of the jobs of the water safety group is to make sure that everyone involved with the systems is competent, which includes people doing the risk assessments on your behalf as well. Making sure your risk assessor is competent is quite a key thing, because identifying risk is sort of the point, really. So making sure that if you're employing third parties, that they're competent. Various ways we can do that. You can look at things like the LCA, which is the Legionella Control Association. UCAS accreditation, mentioned UCAS for laboratories, for sampling. UCAS accreditation also been applied to risk assessors as well. There are different levels of accreditation, that different standards we can look to use. Again, making sure you trust and respect the opinion of the risk assessors can be quite a key thing, but making sure they're doing it to the right standards as well. There's a British standard for Legionella risk assessing, BS 8580, that, well, organisations that have these accreditations are likely to be following. But again, it just makes sure that we are doing things effectively. And then there we go. We've got a list of some of the documents. I'm not going to read all these out, but some of the key documents I've been talking about there, including some of the British standards with regards to design installation. We've got PD 855468, which is a guide to flushing and disinfection, and mentioned the British standard for risk assessing. Right. Last thing for me to say is just thank you very much for listening. I've taken a little bit longer than I anticipated to go through that. So I think we'll leave it open to Q&As now.
Fantastic presentation, Jonathan. Thank you very much. I think Sarah is going to field the question to you, so I will just pass over to Sarah if I picked that up correctly.
Yep, no problem. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you very much. Jonathan, we've just got one at the moment from Ray West, and he says, I'm finding that newly installed air source heat pumps raise the system temperature to 75 degrees centigrade and purge the system on a daily basis, but do not enable a 50 degree plus centigrade temperatures to be reached at outlets or at hot feeds to TMVs. What is the current view on this, please? So I've shared with him, we've got a recent blog that looked at heat pumps in a little bit. It was the energy saving versus Legionella risk, but probably doesn't go into enough detail to answer Ray's questions. So if you want to elaborate.
I will do my best. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ray, for the question. That's a good question. It's not an easy one to answer, because it's perhaps a newer technology than some of the sort of traditional ways of heating hot water. You talk to the manufacturers and they all say they are designed to maintain temperatures, but then in practice in the real world doesn't always seem to be the case. And I get what you're saying. You'll get a pasteurization temperature out of it, but routinely heating the hot water at above 50 degrees can be tricky to maintain. Yes. I'm not quite sure how to answer the question. I'm really sorry, Ray. That's perhaps not answered your question, other than I agree with your sentiment and it is an issue. I'd like to be able to say we could go back to the designers and say, well, the system needs to be capable of maintaining these temperatures for bacterial control. The practicalities of that might not be quite so straightforward.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was the only question at the moment. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to put them in either the Q&A or in the chat, and we will pick them up. Maybe just give people another minute or so to ask any further questions. What I'll also do as well, I will add into the chat a link to our blog page. So we have a team of authorizing engineers like Jonathan here who publish regular articles covering all sorts of topics. I've put one in the chat already, but we cover things like how to manage dead legs, blind ends, temperature monitoring. There are flushing, little used outlets, academy videos. It's completely free to subscribe to, but I'll pop the link in the chat now if anybody would like to subscribe to start receiving those.
Just one quick question for me, Sarah and Jonathan. Thank you much for that absolutely brilliant presentation, and thank you for everyone for attending. The Water Hygiene Centre, I see your based head office is down in Oxfordshire, but what is your range? Do you cover the whole of Britain, or is it England, or what is the area that the company covers in terms of your inspections and things like that?
So we have consultants based remotely. So head office is in Oxfordshire, as you mentioned, but our consultants do cover the whole of the UK. So we have clients right all the way up to Orkney and Shetland, all the way down to Jersey and Guernsey. So we do cover quite a large area.
Brilliant. I see another question coming in there, Sarah.
Okay. Is there an increased risk associated with the residue created and adhered on the inside of pipework in systems being dosed with CuAg ionization? Any advice on how to safely remove this? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question.
Is that copper?
Yeah, copper silver
Yeah,
ionization.
copper silver,
So
yeah.
obviously the presence of copper silver in a system is often used as a supplementary control. So it's I'm going to use the word biocide. It's technically not a biocide because it's electrically generated, but for purposes of this, that'll do for the moment. So the presence of it in the system can make a very good impact on the water quality. It can help break down biofilm. It can help kill off Legionella, Pseudomonas in the water systems. One of the downsides with copper silver that I come across quite routinely is it can stain hand basins, ceramics, things like that. As far as I'm aware, willing to be dissuaded of this, but as far as I'm aware, that staining is not it's not a contamination. It's not a food source. It is literally just a discoloration due to the presence of the copper and silver. As far as I'm aware, that's not a problem. I've not come across any other residuals being left in pipework from a copper silver system. So that might be a conversation we might need to have outside of this forum if you wanted to discuss that in a bit more detail.
I've also just added to the chat, we do have a blog on traditional water treatment methods. It's a 3-part blog, and part 3 does look at copper silver ionization. So hopefully you might find that a bit useful as well. Another question here, Jonathan, from Simon. Hi, Jonathan, nice presentation. My question is related to flushing. So with the cost of water going up, how is flushing being balanced with trying to save water consumption? In fact, Simon, I don't know if you were able to see the message that I popped in the chat earlier on. We do actually, literally, like in the last week or so, we've just published a blog which discusses or looks at energy saving versus the risk of Legionella. And within that blog, we do focus on flushing as well. But Jonathan, if you wanted to add anything to that?
It is, again, a lot of these risks are balanced, aren't they? Balancing Legionella risk, balancing scalding risk, balancing wasting water, definitely an issue. The best option is, if you've got an infrequent used outlet or low use outlet, is actually to consider removing it. Because if it's no longer there, you don't have to flush it. That's not always practical to do, but that would be the ultimate gain. So it's then balancing the cost of flushing against the cost of removing, not just physical monetary cost, but the actual cost of removing it. From a sort of water safety perspective, I wouldn't. I've seen it in the past where, again, a lack of competency, lack of training, the people doing the flushing stop because they think they're wasting water. A particular client, this is many years ago now, we had a hose pipe ban on at the time, and the cleaning staff were doing the flushing, and they thought they were doing the company a favour by not flushing some outlets. And it led to some problems. So from a sort of a hygiene perspective, from a safety perspective, flushing is a good way of managing low use outlets. But if we could eliminate the risk, that would be the better option to go for. It's a balance at the end of the day. Hopefully that helps there, Simon.
Thanks, Jonathan. And that, I think, is about it, unless
Yes.
anybody else has anything else.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very, very much both for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for attending the webinar. If you have any more questions, please reach out to Sarah and Jonathan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.